A man was essentially convicted by car. Yeah. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Genna Gamble. Viewer discretion is advised. Genna Lynn Gamble was born on September 19th, 1981, and she was actually born in Mesa, Arizona, which is nearby where I live. However, at the time this case occurs, her and her family were now living in Modesto, California. Genna attended high school at Bayer High School, and she was actually in her freshman year when this case occurred. She also had a brother named Garen, and by all accounts, Genna was your prototypical teenage girl. Got good grades, was popular, but, teenagers are going to be teenagers, and sometimes they, irritate the parents. And, Genna would find herself grounded on more than one occasion, not allowed to use the phone to call her friends. And as a matter of fact, that is where Genna found herself when this case occurred. That takes us to October 14th, 1995. Kathy Mauser, who was an aerobics instructor, would leave the house that morning, which was a Saturday morning, to go to her work. When Kathy left the house, at the home still was Genna and her husband, Douglas. His name was Douglas Mauser. Before Kathy leaves the house, though, she does remind Genna, hey, you are grounded this weekend, and so absolutely no using the phone at all this weekend, and especially while I'm gone. Genna basically says, okay, Mom. And then Kathy leaves the house, not realizing that's the last time she's ever going to see her daughter alive again. Kathy Mauser then arrives back home sometime around 1 p.m. And when she does so, at this point, there's no one there. No one's home. The door was locked, which was also unusual because there was always someone at the house, always. And so to come home with the door locked was very unusual already. But when she entered the home, no one was there. There is no reason she could think of as to why Genna wasn't home. She did know that her husband, Douglas, was planning to go to work that morning. And so at that point, she becomes concerned for Genna. Where is she? What has happened here? There's no sign of a struggle or anything in the house. There's no indications that anything violent or bad happened. It's just an empty house. Well, Genna would soon be located. About 20 miles from where the Mausers lived, the body of a young female was found. This young woman was completely nude, and it was clear that she had met with a violent end. The body would very quickly be identified as 14-year-old Genna Gamble. She had been strangled to death. When the coroner had the body, he determined that not only has she been strangled to death, that was her ultimate cause of death, but there were at least a couple different blunt force trauma injuries to her head. Someone struck her over the head, maybe with a punch, or they didn't really know for sure. Genna, who had no clothes on and especially no shoes, had no dirt on the bottoms of her feet, which meant to them that she was not forced to walk to the area where she was found. It told them that she was likely murdered somewhere else and then dumped in that location. When police looked at the phone records, they found out pretty quickly that Genna broke the rules in place for her while she was grounded that weekend. Almost immediately, time-wise, after her mom left, there were phone records to indicate that she did call her friend that morning. And I think she made actually a couple calls that morning. But she had been speaking to her best friend, and the best friend would later tell police that when she was talking on the phone to Genna, suddenly the call just stops. Genna just hangs up. And what that tells the friend is that Genna was likely interrupted by a parent. Because if someone had broken into the house, a stranger that she didn't know, and they just burst into her room, certainly there would have been a scream, a loud sound, something, but that didn't happen. If it was like a boy that she had been seeing or something that kind of came in, Genna would have just said to her best friend, oh, hey, so-and-so is here, I'm going to go now. And so that really told people that it was likely her mom or dad who saw her on the phone or was walking into the house, and Genna had to suddenly hang up the phone. Now, the friend would later recount to the authorities that the conversation she had with Genna on the phone was completely normal. They talked about their normal teenage girl stuff. Genna did not indicate that anything was wrong, just that she was grounded, which was, normal. Genna's friends would tell police that there were a couple of guys who were like 18, 19-year-old guys who seemed to at some point be infatuated with Genna and was essentially preying on Genna because, again, she's 14 years old. They narrowed it down to one guy in particular who may have done something to her, but apparently, according to the prosecution later and the police, that individual had a solid alibi at the time that this would have happened. And so who was the next likely person? They also ruled out the brother. The brother had nothing to do with this. And so they next went to Douglas Mauser, her stepdad. He had been in her life since Genna was 2 years old because, Genna's parents had divorced a long, long, long time ago. And according to Genna's friends, her and Douglas had a very decent relationship. Genna seemed to like Doug. They got along for the most part. Nothing like would ever jump out and say, oh yeah, Douglas abused the kids or screamed at them all the time or something like that. There was really nothing out of the ordinary. Just your typical, dad yelling at a teenage person for doing something wrong kind of thing. Nothing substantial that really jumped out to anyone. So they want to know where Douglas was that morning because they want to be able to rule him out. Well, he said he went to his job that morning for a couple of hours. He worked at a federal research facility, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And at first, police looked at this and go, okay, he has an alibi. We can confirm his alibi, right? Well, not so much. So Doug says he was at the office during the time frame in which police narrowed down as to when she was kidnapped and murdered, or murdered and then just in the house and then dumped somewhere. When the police question one of the guards there who has to open the gate to let people into the facility, the guard says he does not recall seeing Douglas there at all that day. When they asked Douglas, well, can you describe the guard you talked to? He couldn't do it. He could not describe the man he saw that he says he saw that would let him into the facility. This is a guy who has been working, Doug, at this facility for a very long time, who knows the security guard, sees him all the time. So it's kind of strange to them that he wasn't able to describe the security guard he said he saw. And what that told police was, he's hiding something, he must be guilty of this. But you cannot just say a person is guilty and convict them without evidence. So what was any evidence they may have had against Doug? Well, pretty shitty evidence, if you ask me, and a lot of people. When police searched the Mausers' house, there was not a single sign or indication that anything happened in that house. No struggle, no forced entry, there were no blood spatters anywhere, no pulled out hair, nothing. There was nothing in that house to indicate anything bad had happened. So next they look at Douglas's car, and it's the car that to police and later the prosecution would say was a landmine. It was full of forensic evidence. It wasn't, though. When they looked in the car, again, there's no blood, there's no pulled out hair, there's no DNA that's not Douglas's, there's nothing to indicate a crime or anything or a body being transported or something in the car. What they did find underneath the car, however, was some vegetation. Specifically, they found yellow star thistle underneath the car, which told them that he had driven that car in an area with this yellow star thistle. But here's the thing. In that area of California, pretty much all over California, yellow star thistle is extremely common. This is not a rare plant. Odds are you're going to be driving somewhere and eventually you're going to get that thistle under your car. It's just because of how common it is. Well, at the dump site where, the body was eventually found, there was an ample amount of this yellow star thistle. So that told them that he must have driven the body to that area to dump her. But they could not state that it was the exact same yellow star thistle underneath his car that was found at the dump site. They can just say they're in both locations. But again, this plant is found everywhere. And so again, they ask him, are you sure you were at work that morning? I mean, we have this yellow star thistle now. It's at the dump site and under your car. Can you explain that? How can you explain to us and give us evidence that you didn't do this. We said, well, again, I have an alibi. I was at work. Outside of the security guard thing, no one else seems to be able to physically place Doug at his place of work at the time this would have happened. There really wasn't many people there. And the next thing they saw was that there were cameras at this facility. And when they go to check the camera footage, of course, the cameras were not operating at that time. So there was no video evidence of him going there. He also tells them, okay, well, I went to a Jack in the Box that same morning during that time frame to get some food. They go to that Jack in the Box. Unbelievably, they have cameras. They weren't working that day. That's an insane coincidence of bad luck. And then no one could identify as seeing Doug that day at Jack in the Box either. So his alibi appears to be shot. The Star Thistle appears to place him at the crime scene. But that's not enough. That just isn't enough. They're not going to be able to prove it's the same Star Thistle. Well, next they get a little creative. When Genna was found, not only did she, have strangulation and blunt force trauma, but she also had other, they don't really want to say they were injuries, they were marks on her thigh, on her leg, that jumped out to them. They're like, okay, well, can we identify these markings on her leg? And one detective was going over Doug's car again and looking at it closely. And one thing they noticed is that half of the back seat was up, the other half was flattened down. And that's because that seat was broken. So it was permanently down. But it was also the perfect angle to kind of put a body in without really struggling much. Then the detective takes an even closer look at the seatbelt. And the seatbelt it had a familiar pattern to him. He said, well, there is one marking that looks very similar to the top of the actual seatbelt itself, the place where you would put the buckle into. And then he noticed that the carpeting on that seat that folded all the way back, when he lifted it up a little bit, he saw this long, straight line of fabric that had like these little, markings on it where they would sew it or whatever. And so they take a photo of that and they line it up with a photo of the markings on her leg. And they say, according to them, the same long mark that was found on her thigh matched the pattern on that carpeting in the car, because they said when he probably put the body in the car, it moved the fabric, it bent it to then have that line of fabric pattern onto her leg. Now they wanted to test this theory, so they got a model, a woman who was the same size, weight, and everything as Genna. They had her lying in the same position that Genna would have likely been laying in the car, and they had her do that for about 15 to 20 minutes, because it took 15 to 20 minutes to get from the Mauser's house to the dump site. And I guess, lo and behold, they discovered that there was those same markings, or very similar markings, on the test model. And so, boom, there you have it. That's it. That's the evidence. That's the evidence, folks. That is the evidence. That's it. The car. A car is what convinced them, the fabric. By the way, this is the same car that he had been driving, Doug, for a very long time, a car that Genna had been in numerous times. It's possible those markings could have come at those times, or it's just a similar looking pattern. Could they say with absolute certainty that pattern on the carpet was the precise same pattern found on her thigh? No. But it convinced the detectives, so they arrested Doug Mauser. He denied having anything to do with this. He thought they were crazy. But they said, hey, listen, you can't describe a security guard that you see all the time. Suddenly you can't describe him? The security guard says he doesn't see you there that day. We don't have any footage to show that you were there. We have no one to place you there. Well, they also would look to his office, and because he said he was in there working on his computer. And when they go in there to look at his computer, there really wasn't any sign that he had actually been working on it that day. It doesn't mean he wasn't there, though. It just means that during a certain time frame, he wasn't using his office or his computer. We don't have the footage from you at the Jack in the Box because the cameras weren't working, but no one there who worked there could recall seeing you there. They also see a bunch of people every single day. They're not expecting to have to remember a person. And so that's very explainable as to why they wouldn't recognize them. They see hundreds, if not thousands, of customers a day. But still, they charge him with her murder. and they go on trial. At trial, they put up the witnesses who testified about the yellow star thistle, but all the experts that were brought up, that included defense experts and prosecution experts, that stated that you cannot say with certainty that that's the exact same plant from the same area. And again, they reiterated that that plant is so unbelievably common that it's just, you cannot rely on that as being any evidence in this case. You just can't. And so that was basically a wash. Then they brought up this one expert, who's an expert, a specialist in photogrammetry, the practice of using mathematical calculations to uncover information about a picture. Okay? So this expert noticed or thought that the patterns on her body were done post-mortem, after Genna was already dead. And that's why the indentations were so strong on her body, because the way the blood works in a person who is no longer alive. But also, here's the other problem with that, is that you can say the patterns look similar, which is what this guy said. Now, by the way, other experts also came up to say, you can't say that definitively. This includes defensive experts and prosecution experts that stated the opposite. Like, you could say it was from Doug's car, but you also can say it wasn't from Doug's car. Because how do you narrow it down to his belt buckle and his carpeting? Many cars are going to have something very similar. The seatbelt especially is going to be extremely common looking. And that fabric, it's not anything unusual. It's not a signature stitching or anything. It's what you're going to find probably with most cars. But they just kept going with it. And the prosecution would come up with this theory that Doug had been there that morning. He had gotten into the shower, and he got out of the shower to get ready to go to his office for a few hours. But as he was walking down the hallway, he heard Genna talking on the phone when she wasn't supposed to be. And again, this is something, Genna would push the envelope. She would push buttons, because she's, again, a typical teenager. This is not just a her thing. It's all of them, basically. And they said he flipped out. He got really angry at her, constantly disobeying her, being grounded and just doing what she's not supposed to be doing anyway. And that, according to prosecution, set Doug off. And he punched her. He hit her in the head, which would explain the blunt force trauma injuries to her head. Realizing immediately, holy shit, I just punched her, and I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to lose my job. So I have to get rid of her. Theorizing that she was going to be able to rat him out. And so he had to kill her. That was their explanation. Her own mother basically defended Doug, saying, I don't think he did this. There were other people who said there's just no way. He is this nice, perfect neighbor. He's this good friend. He's a good guy. His coworker said he was great. He was wonderful. Even Genna would say it, early on in her life, that she enjoyed Doug, that they were close. And her friends would also state that Doug appeared to be really good with her. But that doesn't mean, because how often do you hear stories like that? Oh, he was so nice. You never would have thought, We see it on all true crime stories almost. It's always the person you don't expect to do it that actually does it. And if I'm being, honest here, I think that theory of she disobeyed these orders and Doug just kind of lost it in that moment and hit her, that actually makes sense. That tracks. Because he would lose everything. He would lose his job. He would lose his wife. He would lose everything. He would go to jail. And so he tried to make it look like somebody else did it. Maybe a boy that she was seeing. Maybe a boy that was stalking her. Maybe that's why she was nude, to give the implication that she had been sexually assaulted, which, by the way, forgot to mention, the coroner found no signs of rape at all. There were no defensive wounds on her. And if this was like a boy that came after her and she knew it and saw it, she would have defended herself. But Douglas, her stepdad, being someone that she's always pretty much gotten along with, maybe he's yelling at her. She's not going to expect him to throw a punch. And so that's why there was no defense wounds, perhaps. The prosecution's job is to prove someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Whether you think Doug Mauser actually did this or not, like whether you personally feel that, there is no physical evidence in this case that says he did this. All they have is very flimsy, very generic circumstantial evidence. That is it. They have many people who are standing up for Doug's character, but that again doesn't mean he wouldn't do something like this. But the evidence is so minimal that I am amazed that the jury came back with how they came back. And they actually deliberated for days and days. This took them a long time. They found Douglas Mauser guilty of the murder of his stepdaughter, Genna Gamble. Did he do it, though? You know, I coming from someone who's from the outside looking in, I don't know. Do I think it's possible he did it? Absolutely. His alibi didn't check out. He lied potentially about his alibi. He, you know, the neighbors would tell police at some point that there was, you know, loud arguments that would happen, that tempers would flare up in the Mauser household, that Doug wasn't this saint that everyone said he is, but he's also not a monster. He's just sort of like your typical, I don't know, stepdad or whatever. But doesn't every family have tempers that flare up from time to time when kids are misbehaving in the household? Parents yell at their kids. It's normal. It's not criminal. There was no evidence that he ever hit any of the kids or anything like that before. And so doesn't it seem more likely that she was killed by an unknown assailant, possibly a stalker, possibly one of these older boys who was always flirting with her? You could probably put together a case for one of them exactly the same you put together for Douglas Mauser. There was also another theory that would be presented that there is potential drug involvement in this case, that apparently her brother, according to some, sold drugs out of this house. And that maybe Genna saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and so one of these drug people came back to the house and killed her. They also had evidence that Genna had been friends with someone who was a sex offender. Could this person have done it to her? The same evidence you can say against him, you can say about Doug. I think the point I'm just getting at is that whether or not I personally feel or you personally feel if Doug Mauser actually did this, could you with beyond a reasonable doubt state that he did do this? And I know I couldn't say that. And I don't think you could either. We could sit here and say, well, it's the stepdad. Obviously, it's the stepdad. The stepdad has killed their stepkids all the time in the past. We've covered story after story about this. Parents have murdered their children. It's a thing that unfortunately happens. But does that mean that's what happened here? I'm not sitting here saying and defending Douglas Mauser. I'm not really sitting here not defending him. It's sort of like in the middle. You know, I want to think they got this right, but based on the evidence, I don't see how they could have come to the conclusion they came to. It feels almost like desperation from the prosecution to have this case solved ASAP. There is a certain level of pressure that comes with that job, the pressure that comes with the job of being a homicide detective. You know, you got to assure the community there isn't a killer out there still. You got to tell them and convince them that this person is the one and he's now off the streets. And so, I'm left with, I don't know. I don't know. There's part of me that agrees he's guilty. There's a part of me that says, no, he's not. And that's reasonable doubt, folks. Unfortunately, that's just the way the system works. And I feel like the system failed Doug in that regard. Not that he isn't guilty. It's just that you got to have better evidence than what they had. So Douglas was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He has been up for parole a couple of times, I think. The most recent time, basically, he's never owned up to it. He has never admitted he did it, which therefore means he has never shown any remorse for the actions of this crime he may or may not have committed. Is he just being stubborn about it and saying, I'm never going to admit it even though I did? Or is he just not saying he's going to admit it because he didn't do it? But the parole board has turned him down every time. I know Jenna's biological parents or her biological father attends these parole board hearings anytime it comes up with him, and he's making sure that he stays in prison. And I understand, I get it. I get it from that. I'm not a father, obviously, but I can understand that perspective of him not wanting his daughter's killer to be out there again. I completely understand it. I sympathize with it. And it's just a sad situation all around. And so at the end of all of this, 14-year-old Genna Gamble is murdered by someone. Her life is taken from her by, was it Doug or was it by a stranger or someone else she knew? And a person is in prison still for her murder. But then I pose this as a question. Did Genna Gamble truly get the justice she rightfully deserved? But that is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new here, I tell multiple true crime stories here on YouTube every single week. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. Give this video a like and leave a comment so more people can see the video. I think it helps with the algorithm or whatever. And also, I do tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. That's where I'm more known. The links to my TikTok is in the description of this video below in the link tree, or you can search Making a True Crimerer as you see it on this page, and you'll find it pretty easily. So feel free to follow that if you like. I do post compilation videos, however, at the beginning of each month from my previous month of TikTok videos that are usually like 3 or 4 hours long. And then if there is a case you want me to cover, in that link tree below, you'll also find my case list, which is now over 7,100 names. And so if you scroll through it, it's most alphabetical for the most part, and you don't see a name on that list that you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is listed below in the description as well. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I do typically choose my cases at random. However, if you are a loved one to a murdered or missing family member or loved one, let me know in that email that you are a direct relative, and that way I can make sure that case gets a higher priority if you want it to be. Just let me know that as well. But outside of that, that is it for this video, True Crime Roonies. And so, until the next case, ta-ta for now. No. Okay.